Through its research and convenings, the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy seeks to make philanthropy more impactful today and to create a smarter, stronger sector for tomorrow.
On behalf of the Center's Board of Advisors, I'm pleased to welcome you to this Distinguished Speaker Series Luncheon. And please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker for today, Darren Walker, President of the Ford Foundation.
Thank you.
Fred Ali, who chairs the Center's board and is president of the Weingart Foundation, will engage Darren in a conversation about a range of issues, challenges, and insights from Darren's philanthropic journey and how today he is shaping the Ford Foundation today and tomorrow with his leadership. Actually, welcome back, Darren. Darren actually came to a Distinguished Speaker Series luncheon 8 years ago when Judy Roden from the Rockefeller Foundation came.
I did.
And he was working with Judy that time, sort of restructuring Philanthropy 2.0, I think is what she called it. And actually, we've been waiting for Darren to come today for about a year because shortly after he was selected as the new leader of the Ford Foundation, we invited him to, after a year on the job, to come and share his insights. And so we're so delighted that we could make it happen. So Darren, thank you so much. We have over 200 leaders from philanthropy and the nonprofit community, as well as government, some faculty and students. And I'm glad y'all are all here rather than trick-or-treating. Maybe that's later. But we're really looking forward to your remarks, Darren, and I'm sure it'll be all treats, no tricks. I want to take the opportunity to thank some folks who have made today possible. First, I want to thank our sponsor for today's luncheon, the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund, who have been so supportive of many of the Center's ventures, and I want to recognize Eric Riley, who's here today. Eric, thank you. I also want to thank our host committee for today's event, who were instrumental in bringing together this amazing crowd of leaders from across the region. Could I ask you to please stand so we can recognize you?
Yes, you're on the host committee, Bob. Am I in the host? Yes, that's you. I have a check.
I'd also like to take a moment and acknowledge Dean Jack Knott. Jack is a good friend of mine. He's been a fellow of the center long before he came to USC. And he gets it. He understands the importance of philanthropy, nonprofits, and social innovation to governance and public problem solving. And actually, he was a force behind the creation of a new degree at the Price School, which will launch this June, a master's degree in nonprofit leadership and management. And there's a brochure on your desk. So Jack, thank you for your leadership.
Yay, Jack.
And finally, I want to acknowledge the members of the Center's Board of Advisors that are here today. They provide wise counsel and advice to Jack and myself. Their unwavering support of the Center and its work has really contributed to its many successes, and we want to recognize them. So if you would stand, members of the Board of Advisors.
Yay!
Let me just mention the after the Q&A between Fred and Darren, we're going to have Darren's going to field some additional questions, but given the size of the audience, there are index cards on your table. So if You have a question you want him to answer, if you write it down. And then we have a couple of students, Marissa and Catherine, that will be they're at the back of the room, I think. Raise your hand. They're going to be walking around collecting them, and we will get them to Fred so he can pose them to Darren. So that will help facilitate things. And then my final job for today, and then I can just have fun, is to introduce one of our founding board members, Wendy Wachtel. Wendy, I'm sure many of you know her, whether it's as president of the Joseph Drown Foundation, her service on the boards of trustees of many of the local schools, or maybe as a member, I think the president of the Friends of the Princeton Water Polo team. She's a proud Trojan, and I think she's now glad her kids are alumni rather than students. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Wachtel.
Welcome and happy Halloween. As I was getting dressed today, I realized I opened my closet and my husband laughed at me because I have so much orange and black. And only because my children are at another institution where they are, the only other institution, I think, where the fans are as rabid about their colors as USC is. So I had plenty to wear to celebrate Halloween today. And I must admit, it made me think back probably 20 years when, along with many of you in this room, I arrived at a LA Urban Funders board meeting to find Shirley Fredericks as the most superb Tina Turner you have ever seen. And I must admit, when Shirley walked in, I was quite disappointed.
She's over there.
And that nobody else in the room was in costume. But it really did make me realize how long so many of us in this room have really been hard at work on all of these issues, that we have been coming together and we have been talking and hard at work on all of these issues. And truthfully, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it's astonishing how little we knew about ourselves as a field. And that's where the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy came in 15 years ago. And they really recognized that there was a need for us to understand ourselves better and to provide the field of philanthropy with some well-researched information so that we were able to make better decisions, so that we were better able to understand the emerging issues in public policy, and so that we could figure out how to advance our own field forward. The center stepped up 15 years ago and filled that void and has been active on those issues ever since. And in that same process, the center has really built quite a remarkable national reputation and an important resource in the field of philanthropy. You all have some brochures on your seats, and you can see in there that the center's mission is to promote more effective philanthropy and strengthen the nonprofit sector through research that informs philanthropic decision-making and public policy to advance community problem solving. And in order for us to be effective at doing that, we as philanthropic leaders have to have a better understanding of one another and of the issues in our field. And I'm really proud of what the center has been able to do to meet those needs and provide really insightful research and analysis of the field of philanthropy. And from all of the studies that get done here in public philanthropic partnerships and on the trends of California foundations, the center's research is rigorous, it's relevant, and it's usable to all of us. And just as importantly, the center has astonishingly become an extraordinary convener of the talent in our field, and this room really goes to support that. It is, in Southern California, it has really become a place where the philanthropic leaders come together and through the Distinguished Speakers Series, such as today, through the leadership forums, through the roundtables, through the conversations, it's really brought together all of the thought leaders from across the sectors to spark some real discussions and build some collaborative solutions to all of the challenges that we face both as institutions and individuals in our community. And it's been really quite remarkable to watch that develop over the 15-year history of the center. The center continues to provide vital services to our communities, and it promotes that dialogue and has become really a vital role in the public problem solving and helping create those networks that can really and work so that we can all work together to make a difference in our communities. The center, there's a number of you in the room that have been involved as funders of the center from the beginning, and I would ask all of you, the philanthropic partners are really quite a remarkable group of people. They have realized from very early on that philanthropy, like every other field out there, really benefits from us taking a careful look at what we do and from that discussion and debate and really believe in the importance of building our own field. So I would like to ask the philanthropic partners to all stand up for just a moment and let us acknowledge that support to the center, please.
Yay, Lana. Yay.
The last few years have taught us a lot of things. I know for me, it's really reinforced the ever-changing nature of philanthropy and the critical need for places like the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy. And I really do encourage all of you to join this group of dedicated supporters so that we can ensure that the work of the center can continue. I thank you. We'll take a break. We'll resume with more conversation after the main course. In the meantime, please enjoy your lunch and please enjoy those at your table. It's a very, very interesting group of people. Thank you.
Good job, Wendy.
I want to introduce Fred Ali, who's the president of the Weingart Foundation, a good friend, colleague, mentor, and chair of my board, and Darren Walker, who really needs no introduction, but the president of the Ford Foundation.
Thank you. You'll go first. It is great to be in Los Angeles. And I will tell you, as a New Yorker, I've often been fascinated by this dialectic of Los Angeles, New York. And I completely get it now. And it is really amazing what happens to you when you get off the plane and there's an airport with wide aisles and people actually smile at you. Yeah. And you walk out and the weather is magic. And then you meet these amazing people at every turn. Yeah. And so I kind of get it now.
Yeah. So we're very happy. So, well, listen, Darren, this is a really electric, excited crowd. So I want to get right into the conversation. But I was trying to figure out where to start, and somebody handed me, and don't throw that water at me, but somebody handed me something from Wikipedia, font of all information
Indeed.
in the world, that described you as a humanitarian, social justice, good governance, excluded groups, humanities, poverty reduction, mentorship, and public education expert, as well as a philanthropy, law, nonprofit, servant leadership, communications, human welfare, international affairs, housing, human rights, urban development, democracy building, and community development expert.
That's the problem with Wikipedia, is that as a supporter of the Creative Commons and more transparency and crowdsourcing for information, it is a challenge sometimes.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
I notice it's been replaced on Wikipedia.
Yes.
So let me start off sort of on the personal level. And I have found you to be a really warm, engaging individual. And but I'm always interested, and I'm sure everyone here is interested about early life experiences and where those experiences take us. So you were born in a charity hospital in Louisiana, raised by a single mother, grew up in the South, and eventually went to the University of Texas at Austin, where you received your undergraduate and law degree. So I'm interested to know how those early years, those early life experiences prepared you for the career you now have in philanthropy?
Well, I think the lived experience that we all bring to our professional careers has a lot to do with how we do as leaders. And so for me, my authentic experience, which was not one of privilege, has helped me as I've transitioned into a sector that is enormously privileged and entitled and self-absorbed and sometimes narcissistic. And that experience has been very profound. When I interviewed at the Rockefeller Foundation to be a director in 2000, I was told by some that I really didn't fit the Rockefeller Foundation profile. I hadn't gone to an Ivy League school. I was a product of public schools. I've never attended a day of private school in my life. I had never written for an academic journal. All of the director level people at Rockefeller had PhDs or were public health physicians. I had an experience of being a practitioner, but practitioners weren't hired at the director level and higher. They were hired as program officers. And I had a very unusual background in law, and I'd spent time on Wall Street, and it just didn't add up to a profile. And fortunately, some people thought that I could do the job. But it really reminded me through that process, as I today assess talent, how important it is to look disruptively at how you build a team and how you build an organization and how you think about the complementarity of capacities and skill sets you need and backgrounds. It's very important. And just because you're African American and come from a low income background doesn't mean you have empathy. Let's just be really clear about that. But ultimately, that capacity in philanthropy is particularly needed. And it's needed in leadership generally in the world, and particularly in our own country. Because leadership and success today are not often correlated to empathy or a capacity for human understanding. It's correlated to spreadsheets and to apps that create things. So yeah, I think it's helped me. The last thing I would say is I have been asked, people say, what position, what training prepared you to be a president of a large foundation? It actually was my first job. When I was in the 7th grade, I got a job as a busboy. And when you're a busboy in a restaurant, it's remarkable what you learn about humanity. And because you are invisible in many ways, and you don't speak to people, and you circle the room, taking care of other people, and being the recipients of what they discard, whether it's in the bathroom or whether it's in the restaurant. And so that experience was enormously helpful to me as I think about my job today.
We share that in common. I was a busboy at a Holiday Inn in Chicago. And it's amazing what angry restaurant workers do in the kitchen. Just saying. I'm not sure if that was your experience, Darren. Darren, you said, I heard you say last night that that you feel like the invisible shield or arm of philanthropy has benefited you throughout your whole life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. So the thing that I love about America that is so rare is that there are actually a lot of stories like mine. What happens is that, and what has happened often in my life is that people want to hold up a model and say, oh, look at him.
Right.
That's really not, that singular story is not. It's that there are lots of stories like mine. And so And my story really begins, in many ways, in a very small town in rural Texas. And I was standing on the porch of our little shotgun house in Ames, Texas in 1965. And a lady walks up, and my sister and I are sitting on the porch, and my mother is in the house, and she knocks on the door, and she explains to my mother that she wants to enroll me in a new program. And the program was called Head Start. And the idea for Head Start, although it is known as a government program, started with research from the Ford Foundation. Mm-hmm. The Ford Foundation gave money to Yale to do pioneering research on developmental supports, particularly around reading for poor, rural, and urban Americans. And so the invisible hand of the Ford Foundation has been in my life through the journey through public schools. Without the Pell Grant, I certainly wouldn't have left college debt-free. The experience of working at a community development corporation in Harlem, the Ford Foundation helped to create the CDC, the Community Development Corporation, the CDC, and we received money from Ford. And so my trajectory has been animated by the intersection of public and private, because that college education was also funded by private philanthropists. There was a wonderful, I was the W.J. McKee Scholar. There was some oil man 100 years ago who left a scholarship for young, bright Texas boys from poor backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so that was private philanthropy, but it was the intersection, and that's what's so amazing about America, is that we have the capacity to harness public and private in ways like nowhere else.
Right. So let me move forward and talk a little bit about when you were hired at the Ford Foundation. And before I ask this question, I want to recognize Irene.
My board chair. And I'm not biased towards her just because she picked me. But she's really special.
So good job, Irene. But what I want to talk about is there's a lot of talk, as you know, in philanthropy about where the leadership comes from. Yeah. There's a perception that foundations oftentimes look outside for their CEOs. But in your case, they looked inside. And so I'm sort of interested in your thoughts on that. If you have an opinion on where philanthropy should be looking for their leadership today.
Well, I think that there is this unfortunate circumstance that often, and I've been on 2 foundation boards, where you think that what is exciting is what is outside. And that's because boards want to do something distinctively, because really the most important thing the board does is choose the CEO. And so the idea of choosing internal people as a sort of a general practice isn't always appealing to boards. Yeah. And part of that is because the pressures that boards are under to do something different and distinctive and cool and hip and what's the latest. And so I think that's part of it. I think part of it is also that we haven't always trained internal people in the field to rise to the CEO level. And that's something else that needs focus. As well, we need people who come from really different experiences before they get to philanthropy. What often happens is we hire people who have been in a sector, they have worked somewhere outside of philanthropy, and then we put them in philanthropy. Philanthropy is a really quirky, strange community in ways, in that it is heavily relationship. People are driven by personal values, and personalize and internalize what they do. And so if someone, when I worked at a law firm, I internalized how many hours to bill.
Yeah.
When I worked at an investment bank, I internalized my P&L because February was bonus time. And so when you go to philanthropy, there isn't a P&L or a bonus, and you're not billing hours. People are there because they have made a choice to do good in society. So for leadership, managing, motivating, leading those people, incenting their excellence is a very different engagement than working in the private sector. And what often isn't understood is how different it is. And so you will hear people say, oh, well, if she can sell shoes, she can sell social justice. It's all, it's a matter of leadership. Do you know? No, because this is some management theory.
Right.
There are management theories that say there are a set of key variables that great leaders have.
Yeah.
And if you find those variables, if they're in a shoe store, grab them, they can run it, or if they're wherever, they've got those variables. My experience has not validated that.
So when you, we were just talking about the number of people you brought into your executive team. So what specifically were you looking for at that level of the organization?
So what I was looking for, first I think it's important to understand what the CEO's job is.
Yeah.
My job is to articulate, translate, transmit, and stand for the mission values of the foundation. I have a role in leading strategy, but I'm not the chief strategist. I don't need to be the chief strategist. I have great people. I have a role to play in that. But my job needs to be in those areas. What the people who report to me, the vice presidents, need are both high competency in the areas we work in, understanding whether it be gender rights and reproductive health, or economic development and housing, or higher education. We need those core competencies. But we also need people who are good managers. And managers, because I believe in Peter Drucker's idea, it is so much about culture. Culture is what is often overlooked, because for new leaders, and particularly high-powered, aggressive, ambitious people, strategy is so alluring. First of all, because it can be put in a PowerPoint, and you can do strategy, and there's always something linear about it, and there are just always arrows and boxes, and the last slide always has impact, and so you know that there's something that, to the way the brain works, there's something really compelling. When you talk about culture, it's so messy.
Yeah.
It's so messy. There's so many intangibles. But that's where leadership, that's where I focus. I am the only person in the building that sets the culture. The vice presidents can reinforce my culture, but they don't have the agency to actually establish it, to articulate it, to drive it, to call it out, to model it. So that's what I'm focused on. And the team, I've been very lucky because it's true, the old adage, you've got to get the right people on the bus as soon as you can when you become a new president. And so I have, through just huge blessing, attracted this amazing team, which puts more pressure on me.
Sure.
Because now I have this extraordinary group who are going to demand more of me.
Yeah.
And I want them to. Yeah. And so it's magic.
So people who have worked with you, and I've certainly seen this over the last day or so, you're working with incredible energy and passion. So what's driving that? What's driving that passion? What energizes you?
Well, first of all, the privilege of what we do. Who gets to do what we do in our society? Most people, my partner's an art dealer. I have to listen to him complaining about collectors not buying the piece in or wanting a 30% discount, or some crazy artist, or
Yeah.
all these, I mean, and that's the way most people live their lives. I mean, that's the way most people, or they're working at a law firm with clients, a client that they hate, or job, I mean, or whatever. I mean, we are in this privileged position. We don't have a marketplace. I mean, and this is what's so distorting about the problem. I mean, when I worked at a law firm or a bank or running a nonprofit in Harlem, I mean, people would be lined up saying, "Where's my housing? You promised it and it's not done yet." Well, we don't have any of that. We don't have P&L. We don't build out. But we don't optimize the privilege. We so under-optimize the privilege. And so what energizes me is the urgency that every day what we do matters in the lives of people. But it's hard to see that because we've become institutionalized and we've become metric-sized. And it takes us away from why we get into this work, which is passion for justice, for education, for the arts. And so for me, it's everyday matters. And I have to, as a cultural intervention, I have to do that because I work in an institution, 10 offices around the world, 470 people. The sense of urgency, they need to see that in me. And it drives some people a little crazy, but they need to feel that.
So this past September, you wrote an open letter about your first 12 months on the job. And you talked about, I think, if I'm remembering things right, Darren, I think you traveled 125,000 miles and got out into the world and were able to visit the grantees of the Ford Foundation, visit beneficiaries. That had to be an energizing experience in and of itself. But talk a little bit about what you learned during that travel and how it may impact Ford's approach to social justice in the future.
Well, you learn how much more the world is alike than we often know or think. So when on one of those trips, I landed in Lagos, and my colleagues in our office in West Africa said, we've planned this trip out to this place called Makoko, which is a slum right on the water, very close to the airport. And if you know Lagos, it is hyper fill in the blank, whatever it is. It is hyper. I mean, Lagos has, one of the highest grossing Louis Vuitton shops, and they have the worst poverty in the world. I mean, it is just this, it is a microcosm of the challenges of the world. And so I get to this wonderful community where we support a group of slum dwellers, as they call themselves, who are working on a development plan because the government is basically displacing them without process, et cetera. But what was so interesting was sitting in the meeting in the room with the community leaders as they were talking about their strategy and remembering my own experience in Harlem in the 1990s when all these developers were descending on Harlem. And I was running a CDC, and we had to have a strategy or we were going to be displaced. And the common language that was used, the common sense of displacement, of injustice, of we've been here all these years and the government never paid any attention to us. No one ever paid it. They let us atrophy, and now all of a sudden the economy is turning and they want to turn this into a yacht club. And that very conversation I can relate to. So what I learned was all over the world, the trend that binds us regrettably is inequality. It is in the United States, the implications are profound for our democracy. In other parts of the world that have weaker democracies, it's not that inequality is going to undermine their growth and it's that inequality is creating and reinforcing the worst element of those cultures. And that is a global trend. And as I said, you can be in a city like Lagos, which is, or not Lagos, just Nairobi or Delhi or Mumbai. I mean, any of the places where we work, and you see it, it is so profound. I was in our Beijing office, and we met with these groups we're supporting, advocating for the rights of children to go to school in the urban areas, because the government has a program of bringing migrant workers to the cities. Of course, you all probably know about the massive urbanization efforts in China, but the children can't go to the schools in the cities. They can't access healthcare in the cities. And so you're sitting in Shanghai, and you're sitting there at the Four Seasons, and you're looking out over this city, and your head is exploding because of the number of cranes. But then when you really look, you see these walls that have these little shacks and slum-like dwellings, which the developers and the government have built to house these families who are coming in from the urban areas to work to build this wonderful new Four Seasons and all the other things that are being built. But the opportunity for those people to really enjoy the fruits of all of this are limited, and that is a global phenomenon. And so for a global foundation that seeks to look at global trends and global problems, something like inequality, particularly for a social justice foundation, it's an easy thing to want to focus on.
So Darren, I know you're getting ready to announce sort of some issue areas, some trends that are going to characterize your programs in the near future. Are you ready to? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So here's my take on foundations doing that, because it's one of my rubs, and there are so many ways that foundations act fecklessly. In this regard, it is so frustrating that when a new president comes, everything needs to be blown up. It is as if, whatever was here before doesn't matter anymore because I'm here now, and we need to have a go-forward strategy. And I have experienced that. I don't think it works. I don't think it's sustainable. It becomes too personality-driven and not nested in the core functions of the. So I am not going to one day, poof, here it is, here's Darren's strategy. What we are going to do is iterate over time and deepen our grant making, our investments in those areas that we think matter more now than they may have mattered 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or the opportunity for impact. But I don't have today, and I don't plan to have, here it is, locked down, never to be touched again, and you guys go execute. Because what we know about strategy, if you're good at strategy, is that it's an iterative process, and particularly when you work in complex systems, because there's serendipity, there's the unknown, and logic frameworks don't always make room for that. And so I'm really excited about directionally where we're going. I think we're going to be clearer about the populations who are vulnerable we're focusing on, but it won't be the pretty PowerPoint.
What a refreshing approach, thank you. And I'm reminded, given that, Darren, about something that you just wrote in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And I'm going to quote, you said, "We in philanthropy need to reorientate the way we see ourselves. We frequently assume that foundations are central protagonists in the story of social change, when really we are a supporting cast." Can you talk more about what you meant by that?
Well, what I meant is what happens. I mean, first, we are ambitious as a sector. We want to make a difference, and we want to think in big and bold ways. But the mistake we make is to put ourselves at the center of the process and to not understand that ultimately the change that we need requires durable, sustainable institutions. And so what's important is to put the idea of a durable, sustainable institution and the human capacity that it's going to take to run, execute, lead over the long haul, and community context at the center. And then we are over here as an investor in that process, but they are at the center of it. And what often happens is we become very self-referential about these processes. And it's hard because the incentives all drive us in that direction. I was in a conversation once with the foundation president about a collaborative. This was years ago when I was first at Rockefeller, and someone had said foundations weren't buying enough value and the taxpayer wasn't getting enough value. And the board member said, it was a board member at the board meeting, who said, tell me what we're buying for that. And I said, I can't tell you the unit that we're buying with this grant because the change process doesn't work that way.
Right.
I can tell you indicators of directionally how they're doing against a set of benchmarks. But I guess what I say is, what I mean is the incentives to, for example, increase and generate what we do best when we are great, which is collaborate.
Right.
The incentives are all against collaboration because the board doesn't want to know that. The board wants to know, what did I do? What did we do? And I think that's why one of my other little things, as Irene knows, is everything that is wrong with an organization or right with an organization, you can place at the doorstep of the board. And so if you have a board that says, tell me what we're buying, or if there's 5 foundations in a collaboration, I can't tell what we bought of that outcome, that's really not a board that understands your work.
Yeah.
And that's the job of the CEO, to say, this is our work. This is why collaboration matters. And it may not be that we get credit, because it's not about getting credit. It's about having impact.
So So it's about having impact, but I wonder, and I think you also talked about this in that same article, with all the focus in recent years on strategic philanthropy, have we fallen into that binary trap that you talked about, where it's always either one or the other?
I hope we are beyond that really tired discourse of the last 10 years, because it's so counterproductive to set up these dialectics of, on the one side, strategic, rigorous, on the other side, not strategic, sloppy, undisciplined, and that we understand that there is context, the impact that you're trying to have should drive how you think about strategy and evaluation. If you're working on an initiative that has a randomized controlled trial, if you can do that, do it. That's great. You have an ability to understand an impact. If you're working on something that isn't randomizable and that requires a different approach to understanding impact, you've got to be able to do that. So it's the theology, this religion that it's got to be this way for everything that gets us into trouble.
Yeah. Amen. So I want to turn to some of the questions from the audience.
Oh, great.
Let's see what I have here. I'm sure this is something you've been asked before. At the center, we write about the many young philanthropists who are at the beginning of their philanthropic journey. And they worry about setting up or they think about setting up a foundation in perpetuity. And then having that foundation sort of drift from the original intent of the donor.
Yes.
And oftentimes Ford is cited as one of those examples. So
Right.
how do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's really important to be candid about that. It is no surprise to many that Henry Ford II in 1976 resigned from the board of the Ford trustees. And he said at the time that he was leaving and he was unhappy with some of what the foundation was doing. He spoke, I think, very favorably about the foundation's work in education, our work in some of the developing world, but he warned us that we were becoming too fragmented, that there was an arrogance among the staff of if it isn't invented in the building, it's not worth doing, that there was an East Coast snobbery to the culture. And yes, Antonio, I knew you would say that. And
We don't know anything about that here.
exactly. And he was right. And Henry was right about part of that critique. The other thing, though, was that when Henry Ford II created the modern Ford Foundation, he created it with a group of independent trustees. That was his wish. And along the way, it is true. There are things that the foundation did. The thing that he found most abhorrent, as I've read in correspondence between him and trustees, was the foundation's women's program. He fought very hard to keep Mac Bundy from electing the first woman to the board because he felt that bringing women to the board would ruin the foundation.
Right.
And that it would change the culture of the boardroom and the deliberations and the dinner that they would have the evening before the board meetings. And he wrote he was very clear about that. It was also very problematic what the foundation was doing in the civil rights era for the company, because there were Southern dealers who were very unhappy that the Ford Foundation was giving money to Martin Luther King and the Southern leadership Christian. I mean, just there were so many grants and so many things that were happening. He didn't like the law school clinics that we were doing to help start the Legal Services Corporation. So there were a number of things that made him unhappy. But I think what's important, because I'm actually quite proud of our history and the transition, and I also recognize that things change.
Yep.
John D. Rockefeller, gold standard today, was the most reviled man of the 20th century. He was so reviled that when he sought to file a charter to give his fortune away, Congress wouldn't allow it because Congress said there is nothing John D. Rockefeller could do with that money but bad and evil. And so the men who were today are the iconic names, Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Frick. These were people who were virulently despised by many during their day. And they took on positions that today are clearly revolting. I mean, these men were all eugenicists. They supported the idea of the eugenics movement, all of them, as did many other prominent, liberal, progressive people. It was a different era. Now, I'm sure that John D. Rockefeller would be somewhat surprised that a Jewish woman is leading the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm sure that Andrew Carnegie would be surprised that an Armenian immigrant is leading the Carnegie Foundation. Yeah. And I'm certainly sure that Henry Ford would be surprised that a black gay man is leading the Ford Foundation.
Well said. So let me go on to a sort of a very different topic. It's actually revisiting something we did here at USC a number of months back. We had Rip Rapsinow from the Kresge Foundation with Irene. And we talked about what Rip and what Ford and others are doing in Detroit. And it's certainly a different sort of approach for philanthropy. So I'd be interested if, what's the update there, but more importantly, what sort of motivated that kind of approach?
Well, first of all, it's really exciting in Detroit. It is so amazing to see what is happening in that city today. There is a remarkable sense of energy. The bankruptcy proceeding, according to the chief judge, will be adjudicated and hopefully at the end of next week will be brought to a close. And it's a great day for Detroit and for America. The exciting thing about that for us, and Rip played a vital role, and of course having Irene on Kresge's board and as my chair really facilitated an accelerated process because we had a person on both boards who's highly regarded by fellow trustees who could explain and translate. Right. But the thing that made that possible, I was being interviewed by a reporter for the Times earlier today, and who doesn't know philanthropy or understand how the sector, this is just a person who's covering the bankruptcy, and the idea that a group of foundations would pretty quickly in a month raise $400 million, she said, so how does that happen? I mean, you went to a meeting and then you foundations, you sat around the table and then how did that happen? Yeah. That doesn't happen. Yeah. In my world, that just doesn't happen. Right. And what I said was, it happened because, as I said earlier, foundations are very relationship driven. We all knew each other from the community of philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And so when I spoke to Rip or Alberto Ibergoin at night, or any of the others, we've had relationships for years. Yeah. And so it was able to move because I could say, okay, I'll help you with your board strategy, you help me with my board strategy. I'll give you my talking points, and there was just a real sense of camaraderie. The other thing that philanthropy can do, and that when you are working on that kind of, is that there are people who, because we do this a lot, who are there to say no. Do we know people in philanthropy and so I often say, I want problem-solving people. I don't think we should have, not very smart yes people, but you want problem solvers. And lots of times in philanthropy, we get no people at the table. And what you have to do in that, if you are part of a collaborative, is figure out ways to keep them at the table so that they can't say no. So we had a moment where it became clear that there was going to be a big legal bill because putting this thing together was just a huge, and of course, several people said, my board won't go for paying for the legal. We can't pay for that. We don't have a consultant, blah, blah, blah. So your role at that time is to go, don't worry, we will pay for that. At every moment when somebody does that, solve it. And even if it means you've got to then call Irene and say, we're going to have to pay the legal. You just solve it. You solve the problem. And if you go into the room with a problem-solving attitude, it is amazing what can happen. And that's what happened in Detroit. And when we stood together in the political, and this is where it got really, really, because we had to, so there was a moment where they were expecting the foundations to pay for everything.
Yeah.
The art, the pen, I mean, it was, and we were on the phone, the foundation saying, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
There has to be a public commitment from the governor. Yeah. We're not political people. We don't lobby. We don't do any of that. But the governor, so lucky me, I called the judge and said, you have to speak to the governor and tell him that this deal is going to fall apart because the foundations are standing fast together. Right. And you can't pick one of us off. Everybody's going to stand. So, and he did. And the governor really initially said, I don't want, this is politically toxic. It's a really challenging situation. It's upstate. Of course, the racial politics and everything in Detroit and in the state of Michigan is so challenging. As a Republican, but it was the group of foundations who just put the pressure on, and we would not give up. And so we said, you have to match.
But Darren, that is really, and again, we talked about this as well last night. That's really bold thinking, and you've said that foundations have, they have power, they have influence, they have independence. They're not constrained like other people in the marketplace. So why don't we see more of this? What's holding us back?
I think it's because boards, again, my board, and again, it's really true. If you have a board that sees its role expansively and not through a set of narrow program areas, and sees itself as a change agent in the community, you get bold thinking. If the CEO orients the board to a bunch of program boxes, then that's what the board responds to, a bunch of program boxes. Yeah. But if the CEO says to the board, you are change agents for this community needs your leadership, that's a very different conversation than talking about, a narrowly defined program.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the one other thing I do want to say on this issue of boards and of independence, because we live in such a time of inequality threatening our democracy. And I spoke last evening at a wonderful dinner. Thank you, Jim and Jack. It was great. But one of the things I talked about was an encounter I had recently with a a university president, and she thanked me for a talk I'd given on inequality and calling out some of the things that I believe are threatening our democracy. And it reminded me of, in our democracy, how insidious and invidious inequality is, because it tears at the fabric of the civic grid, because the civic grid depends on these different checks. And if those checks and balances on the grid are squelched or their voices are silenced, it's really hard for the grid to be vibrant and to be democratic and serve the public. Right. And so, but we are one of those nodes on the grid. Philanthropy can speak truth to power, not politically, not in a way that is outside the realm of, but we can talk about our communities in ways when we see troubling trends, when we see evidence that tells us something is wrong. But it's really hard today to do that, and it's getting harder, and that's very troublesome to me.
Yeah. So let me end with this question and bring it back to institutions like the Center for Philanthropy here. I know you have talked about the importance of research and also field building within philanthropy. Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, Jim, you, of course, have built this amazing thing. And you get my highest compliment because you don't run a think tank. You run a do tank. And I think that there are many, many think tanks in the world. Many of them, quite honestly, do not add value. I'm an ideas person. I love reading papers, and but you've got to have action attached to that research. And that's what's so great about the fact that that great report that the center did finds its way to the White House on the White House website, being linked to other philanthropy movements around the country, and that happens. That's real impact. And so you all should be so proud that you have this resource in Southern California. It's a huge, huge asset for you as philanthropists.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I know Jim thanks you. So Darren, if you'll indulge me, I want to end with a sort of a personal story that happened to me 36 hours ago. I was getting ready to leave, and my 9-year-old granddaughter came up to me with a very concerned look on her face. And she said, you know, Uppa, she calls me Uppa. She says, you know, Uppa, my teacher said that there are kids who wake up every morning and they don't have anything to eat, and they don't have anything to drink, and they don't even know where they're going to sleep tonight. And so she showed me this little box she had, this little UNICEF box. And so she said, before we go out trick-or-treating, you know, I want to put money in this box and help those kids. So it was a, very poignant way to start my day. But I need to tell you, I said to her, I said, you know, Luciana, I'm in a very fortunate position because I'm gonna spend the next couple days with somebody who gets up every morning and goes to bed every night thinking about these very issues. So I want to thank you, Darren, for your commitment to social justice, your passion, and your commitment to the field is something that we all benefit from.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for the honor. Thank you all so much.